All right, well, let's get to it then. Hopefully we'll be done quite a bit early here. So welcome back, everyone. I'm going to share my screen as we talk about supplemental funding and some minor changes to the process this year. I don't think anything too major, but it is going to be just a little bit different, primarily in that it's coming a lot earlier than usual, hopefully. One caveat as we look at the supplemental funding work that we're doing here is that the pages that I'm sharing with you today and the process that we'll be talking about is technically in draft form right now. We're waiting for approval from leadership before we're able to actually send this out and commit to it. But I would imagine it's very much what we'll be seeing coming across to you guys in the next couple of days for supplemental funding. So we'll go with the process as it is now. And if there are any changes, then I'll be very explicit about making you aware of what those changes are from what we're talking about today. So let me start real quick with the purpose behind supplemental funding, because it's kind of weird. And it was one of those things for me in this position that took a minute to get my head around. You know, because we do this funding at the beginning of the year where we send out an application, of course, a grant application, and you express the needs of your program to run a complete and effective program. And we fund that as well as we can. And then we come in a few months later and say, okay, now what other funding do you need, right? And it seems a little strange to me, because it seems almost like we could just ask those questions right up front, right? Have a good plan for the year to move forward and know right from the get-go what funding you have available to support that plan. And ideally, I think we would go with that. The problem that we have in youth in custody, and I'm sure you're all fairly well aware of this, is a lack of flexibility. You know, this is, I think, the only instance where the State Board of Education has a direct responsibility over a program, and yet the funding is confined within an annual process, right? With other programs, those of you who run schools or who work within alternative schools or something like that, you have a little bit of flexibility with your district and your funding, right? There's a little give and take year to year. We don't really have that within YIC funding. We have a set legislative amount that is approved usually at the end of March or the middle of March, I guess. And that is our funding for that year. So we have a limited window to plan and to adjust. And on top of that problem is that YIC, as we all know, is a very volatile world. There's programs changing, adding, subtracting, disappearing all of the time. Sorry, I'm going to pause here for a moment. Amanda, can you reach out to Carla Porter and see if you can help her get attached to us?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, ma'am. In fact, last year, during the course of the year, from after the time that initial applications were finished to the end of the year, I think we had at least 3 major changes. We had a program open up in Ogden. They had a new intensive unit program, and same is true for Slate Canyon, a new intensive unit program there. And then, oh, Carol, I'm glad I saw your face. I was trying to think of what the third one was. Carol, mid-year last year, suddenly found herself in charge of an ALTA transition program, right? So we have these changes happening mid-year that we have to adjust to. And our way to adjust to those changes is to create a little bit of a buffer, to set aside some small amount of money and to set aside a process which allows us to fund for those changes. that's the first reason. The second reason is due to the carryover constraints of our program, right? We're only allowed, LEAs are allowed to carry over 10% of their annual funding from one year to the next year, right? So a program like Granite carrying over 10% might allow you to absorb a new program coming into your district, right? And it might not be a huge deal. However, if you're a small program like Cache School District and a new residential treatment program opens mid-year, that's going to be an expense that you're probably not set to deal with. So supplemental funding adds a little flexibility statewide to let us account for and fund those programs that are opening mid-year, and helps us to fulfill that responsibility of the state YIC program to educate those kids. So the process is that usually in the past, it's been close to December. We receive reports from the school districts, their official reports that say how much funding is left over or carried over from last year, any funds that you received and for whatever reason you weren't able to spend. Maybe, for example, you budgeted a lot of money to take everyone to a promising youth conference and then a global pandemic hit, something like that, and no one was able to go to that conference, right? So we tend to have expenses that aren't able to be realized that we have to account for that funding. Let's see, what I'm gonna do is just kind of go through this application page by page. It's a fairly short application, actually very much simpler than the MSP applications that we do at the start of the year. We'll go through and we'll address questions as they come up and questions at the end. And like I said, if you've done the application before, it should all look fairly familiar, except for possibly the last page, which we'll talk about when we get there. The first couple pages in the application are just the program assurances. I do recommend that you read over those. These are the things that you're agreeing to. They're the same assurances that were included in your MSP application. And I apologize, I know you can't read these. Don't spend too much time trying to read on the small screen. I just kind of wanted to give you a visual of what it's going to look like. But we should be able to send these out in the very near future, hopefully within the next day or two, so that you have your hands and you can read through these. But make sure you read the assurances. These are the board rules and state laws that you're agreeing to adhere to. The signatures required on this application are just your district superintendent, your business administrator, and the project director, which for most of you is you. There's no LIC requirement for signatures on the supplemental funding. It's just those 3 signatures, so it's pretty quick to get those signatures. I do want to talk about priorities. The 4th page of the application kind of lists our priorities of what we're looking to fund this year. And it is both similar to the past and a little bit different. When we put in MSP applications in March, and then we're suddenly faced with different budget scenarios than we expected, we were forced to deny many requests on the initial application. For example, all of you know that basically all out-of-district PD requests were denied, right? That's going to be one of our primary priorities looking at these applications. Is we recognize that our teachers, especially considering the special population they work with, need special professional development, and it's usually professional development outside of what your district tends to offer. So that will be our priority. However, that being said, I'm not entirely sure at this point what the opportunities look like. I know a lot of you submitted for requests for professional development, and those were denied. And if you look, those requests might not be available. So many conferences have still been canceled or have been canceled for this next year that we were planning on. So much travel is just not possible. So while it is our priority to fund any professional development that we can, it's going to be a task to you to find appropriate professional development. So if you do find something that looks particularly intriguing, then please let us know, and we'd be happy to get the word out to everyone as well. Promising Youth Conference has always kind of been a priority for funding in the past. That's a big question mark right now. I sent out a few emails. Carol, have you heard anything? I'm just going to call you out right now because it doesn't seem like much of anyone has heard much.
I haven't heard anything, and it's funny that you bring that up, Nick, because I was going to email Pat and Jenny today and just say, do we have any plans? And if we don't, could we at least, because I feel like the keynote speakers and the ending speakers that we had arranged for this year that got canceled, if we could at least even just do like a virtual, just come hear these people because they were so good. So I'll let you know if I hear anything back from Jenny and Pat.
Well, I'll tell you, I did email it was just yesterday. In fact, as I was typing up the slide, I realized, oh, I haven't heard from these guys for a while. So when I hear back, I'll forward it to you so you can see that as well.
Okay, great.
But this is basically the landscape that we're operating in. I know you're all familiar with it, but there's a whole lot of question marks around a lot of the work that we're doing. So please share, search. Let's work together to find some opportunities out there. Check and connect training. Amanda, I'm going to let you chime in just really brief. I know you're going to talk about this more extensively here in a minute, but check and connect trainings, are these things we should be budgeting for?
Not the check and connect trainings themselves, but I do want to discuss some additional professional development offerings that can come with some college credits. So there might be some fees with those, but they would be optional, of course.
Okay, so Amanda will be talking a little more in depth after this about that opportunity, so keep that in mind. Positive school culture. I like the way that we've worded this. A lot of the applications that we see have different types of incentives included in the application. And I won't talk too much on that because there are board rule and of course local board rules which dictate what kind of incentives can be offered to students. But as we look at creating a positive school culture, as we try and get our students involved and engaged in classes, I think you're all well aware of what's working in your areas. We will look to prioritize those efforts as well. Looking at post-secondary, as we continue to see an older population of YIC students, we're looking to connect these students to employability opportunities, soft skill programs, anything that results in certification, we're really excited about. And the same is true for any sort of college or applied tech type credit that we can support. And then as always, looking for technology upgrades. I think it was North St. Pete had on their application, I think they actually got this funded elsewhere, but they were looking on their original application for some virtual reality setups. And this has been around for a little bit, and it's really, I think, starting to take off, especially with the confinement that we're experiencing. Steve, do you want to talk about that? I'm glad to see you. Thanks for popping in.
Well, no, yeah, you don't want to see me too often. That's why I had the camera off. But with the VR, we actually got approved through our CSI funds to get that in because the virtual reality has a ton of STEM software products out there that you can introduce a lot of all the science and math and technology and stuff. So we did get those approved. We're just running into some issues with Facebook bought Oculus, the company that we're buying through. Right. And now you have to log into a Facebook account. So we're running into a little problem there because the YIC kids at our school aren't allowed on it. So we're working with the state and with Oculus on getting something, but we already have the program set up, aligned, and we already have everything set up. So it's going to be really cool, actually. And so we were able to get that. It actually just got approved last week.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I can't wait to come over and strap on some gear and join your students for a little bit.
And I think you guys are coming to our school in May, so it gives us plenty of time to figure out how it all works too. So
Nice. Yeah, but when we're talking about technology, I think we might see more technology requests this year than ever before, because as we're moving to this digital learning environment and looking at digital learning opportunities and remote learning opportunities, I think many of us are becoming aware of where we're lacking structurally as far as the equipment and technology and infrastructure. So as you're looking to create opportunity to improve and enhance your educational opportunities for your students, that's definitely one of our priorities, looking at supplemental funding. So really, supplemental funding is anything that you need at this point that wasn't included in your MSP app. And I will say it is competitive, right? In the past, it's always been competitive, but it hasn't been very competitive because we've had plenty of funding in the past, right? And by plenty, I mean enough to do what was requested of us. I think we all could improve our skills at enhancing the curriculum and opportunities for students all the time. Yeah, we're learning as we go. However, that may not be the case this year. And I say may not because we're really not sure exactly how much funding is available. And it's kind of a strange world to me to put out a grant application when we don't have a solid dollar amount of what's available. But this actual grant process is what creates that dollar amount, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. We, for our state youth and custody reserve, held back a very small amount from that initial MSP grant that we started back in March and finished, what was it, like 1st of July? That was a mess. But we held back a very small amount to make sure that we funded the infrastructure as well as possible. But through the process of adjusting it and rescinding funds through carryover, funds that weren't able to be spent last year, generally speaking, we have had in the past, we've averaged about $600,000 of funds that we've rescinded and made available to everyone. And I would imagine that that would continue to be fairly close to the case. However, this is definitely a different year this year. And we just won't know what the impact was financially as a state on YIC funding until we receive your carryover numbers as part of this application process. So there is a high potential that this supplemental grant application will be much more competitive this year. So it will be approved through a grant committee. We'll be looking at these in a competitive way. And therefore your program narrative, which has always been part of the process, becomes much more important this year than possibly it was in the past years. You have one page on this program narrative to talk about the reasons that you're requesting the funding, desired outcomes that you hope to achieve with the supplemental funding, and how the funding will lead to those outcomes. Yes, Carol.
Sorry, this is Carol. So with that, with you saying much more competitive this year, that just makes me slightly nervous because I have a staff member that we're paying right now that was going to be paid with supplemental. So
right.
So what you're saying is there's a chance we might not get supplemental.
We've kind of always done this in the past. The funds have already been set aside for that staff member outside of the supplemental process. So we'll include
better and not have to like go fire somebody tomorrow.
Yeah. So in this situation like that, staff member will be included in this grant because that's the mechanism we'll use to get the funding out. But that necessary funding has already been set aside. All right. The budget summary pages, I think they should look very familiar. There's nothing new or changed about those. Just basically breaking down your funding request into categories. I don't know how helpful this is at the LEA level. but it does help us understand where our funding is going and helps us to monitor and develop formulas to make sure that there's an equitable distribution of funds throughout the state. So you'll just kind of mark how much of this set of funding is going towards salaries or towards equipment or travel, PD, that type of thing. All right, this is the new part. This is the change that we're going to see in supplemental funding, and it's not a huge change. It really isn't, but it will allow us to get the funds out a lot sooner and make you aware of the funding that's available a lot sooner. In the past, like I said, we waited for reports, official reports that were sent in from your district to the state of carryover balances from the previous year. And I never really understood this, but those numbers from those reports were never available to us until early December, right? The fiscal year ends the end of June. And for whatever reason, I am obviously not an accountant, but it took that long for LEAs to finalize all the numbers and then submit them to the state. So we'd have those available in early December. We would know that at that point how much money we had available carrying over from the previous year, combined with New Year's money, and then we could create this supplemental fund balance. However, this year, what we're going to do instead of waiting for those numbers is just have you self-report. Now, I think maybe Travis can speak to this. I think it's been done a little bit this way in the past. This is the way that they do it with the EARS funding right now, the enhancement for at-risk students. Travis, do you want to speak to that at all?
No, this is a really smart change. So kudos to you. This makes a lot of sense. The APR AFRs won't come out till November and December. But if you're working closely with your BA, you already know what your deferred carryover is for youth in custody. And so that's a number that if you're saying for us to be eligible, we have to declare in full. I think that is a genius response.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. It was kind of an aha moment when I realized how easily accessible these numbers were. I think I was talking to Jason, in fact, from Granite, and I said, hey, do you know what your carryover numbers are? And he's like, give me a second, let me call the BA. And like 10 seconds later, he had the answer. And it was really as simple as that. And I hope that's the case for all of you, that YIC is a pretty well-defined budget and should be easily accessible to find out your carryover numbers. So on this page of the youth in custody application, the plan is that you self-report your deferred balance or your carryover funds from the previous year, any amount that was not spent prior to July 1st of the current year, right? You'll just report that here on this document. The total FY20 YIC allocation will provide those numbers to you. You can double check and make sure your numbers match ours, but any money that we sent out last year to your LEA from the YIC line items will be included in that total YIC allocation. That's the number from which your allowable carryover is based. So the total amount that we sent to you in the previous year, you're allowed to carry over up to 10% of that amount. So anything, if you self-report in your deferred balance, anything in excess of that 10% will be rescinded. Anything below and up to that 10% will equal your total carryover request, right? How much you want to carry over from last year to this year. And this next page, I think this is the second half of that page. Once you note that total carryover request, you have three options. The total amount you're available to carry over. You can request to not carry over any of those funds, right? That's definitely an option you have. I wouldn't recommend it. As I said, one of the biggest difficulties in YIC funding is creating flexibility, and carryover is definitely one of the ways we create that flexibility, allowing you to carry over up to 10%. It's not enough flexibility in some situations, but it does create some. You can elect to not carry over any. The second option, this is a line taken from our board rule. to help justify it as openly as possible. It says carryover funds will be utilized by the LEA to provide flexibility for new or beginning youth in custody programs or initiatives benefiting youth in custody students, right? The practice the last few years has basically been saying, we'll carry over our maximum amount, and that will be basically a rainy day fund, right? That money that we can use to create the necessary flexibility in YIC programs, right? So we've put that into an official practice here, that you now have the opportunity, that is taken directly from board rule, to say, we're going to carry these funds over to provide flexibility for new or beginning youth programs or initiatives benefiting youth in custody students. Now, the more you look at that, I think the more open that definition becomes. You know, there's a lot that you can do with that flexibility there, and it really creates the opportunity for you to adjust and adapt on the fly. In fact, youth in custody funds can be adjusted up to 10% from your original application without a request of any kind to the state board. If you look to make adjustments above 10%, then you do have to submit a formal letter to us. And if that's ever the case, we can talk about it at that point, but it's a fairly simple process. The third option, you can specifically detail how your carryover funds will be used. Again, this is an option that I don't see as being necessary or essential. It is part of our board rule that opportunity be there, that we can request a carryover spend plan. But I believe that second option gives us the flexibility necessary. If you'd like to be more specific in how you carry over those funds, or you figure out a way to use that box to work the system a little better, then it's there and available to you. And it's a very small space on this form. So if you do want to create a carryover spend plan, then feel free to fill it in. Now, as I say that, I want to remind you that this is part of the supplemental funding process. So if there are specific things that you want to do with funding, I would recommend that you put those in your supplemental request, which we can then fund separately from your carryover spend plan. So you'll have funds from the supplemental grant, and you'll still be able to maintain that flexibility in your YIC funding of that 10% from the previous year to this year. Let's see. Oh, so here's maybe not the first lie I've told today. I wrote that the applications would be available today. That's not entirely true. In fact, it's not true at all. The applications won't be available today, but they should be available very soon after today. We'll work to expedite this process to get those applications in your hand as soon as possible. Depending on that date, this October 19th date may change, but this is the date we're looking at right now. October 19th of 2020 gives you a couple of weeks, almost 3 weeks with those applications. And I will tell you, in the past, YIC application deadlines have not been probably as firm as they should have been. With this supplemental request, this deadline will be very firm. We'll need the information for your request by this deadline, because everyone's request is dependent upon everyone else's information. So if you're looking for YIC supplemental funding, you'll have to have the application in by the deadline. And then of course, we will get the award notices provided as soon as possible after that. I put November in there. It will be a matter of us being able to get a committee together to review those applications, which, working in this virtual world, actually seems to happen a lot faster. So we'll get those funds made available to you as soon as possible. All right, so I just shared a lot of information. I think not too much of it was new, but let's open it up for questions here for a moment. Yeah. Let's see. So let's start with Ed. The due dates on the slide will be the due date. We'll call them soft for now. Like I said, this is officially a draft, but this is the timeline that we're looking to enforce. Yeah, any other questions? Carol, we'll send this whole thing out to you, the whole presentation.
That means I'd have to go back and look at something.
Oh yeah, okay, great point.
No, I appreciate it, thank you.
All right. Julia, what is next on our agenda? Because I think that might be all I have to say.
Awesome. I think we're done hearing from you, Nick. No. Great job. It's always nice to talk numbers. And you make everything sound so possible, which is awesome. Next on the agenda, we have Amanda, who's going to update us on Check and Connect and talk about what's going on there. Amanda, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go, but like Nick, I don't push buttons and talk very well anymore. So let me, oh, and I had to reboot during lunch. Let me pop open my PowerPoint real quick. Oh, golly. Sorry, my computer is just doing the little spinny guy here. Okay, now I should be able to share. Well, thank you for some time today on the agenda. It's so nice to be back in the YIC world, and I'm excited to help us all improve mentoring statewide. So part of the efforts I have done since COVID started is I have created a webinar series. And during the first, or excuse me, for the first webinar's exit questionnaire, I asked the mentors what types of professional development they needed. Oh, and I'm not looking at my slide. Haha, we're going to talk about data before we talk about professional development. I guess I was just so wrapped up in the conversation about funding professional development, that's where I went. All right, let's take a step back. So, as you all know, mentors collect weekly data that you all compile and send to us at the end of each term. And we tried to compare apples and oranges this summer and discovered they were apples and oranges. So we have made some changes to the Check and Connect Excel spreadsheets. And then I converted them also into a fillable PDF if that's your preference. So in addition to the Check and Connect ABCs, which are, you know, the academic, behavior, and connection data that the mentors were already collecting, and connection, for those of you that don't know, is the interventions the mentors use. So in addition to those regular data points that they've been collecting, we're going to have each district on the case summary report which DHS agency the students are in custody of, whether that's DCFS, DJJS, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as using the Youth in Custody indicator. And if you'll notice there, it says Youth in Care /other. That will be used for students who are still receiving mentor services but aren't necessarily in the custody of one of the other DHS agencies. They will also be tracking the service provider, which is the proctor agencies the students are placed with, such as Youth Services, Pinnacle, Starlight, etc. And this was done not only for us to have an idea of who they're connecting, or excuse me, who they're placed with, but it's hopefully giving the mentors the connection of who they should be collaborating with on the student. You know, if only to ensure that they're not both pulling students out the same days or same times regularly, so that the students aren't missing out on either classroom or Zoom activities, depending on how the kids have gone back. They will also be on the term summary, collecting the cumulative GPA, and that will be both when they're accepted into the program And then each term we'll update that, hoping to see some progress with students. And the same goes with secondary ed students credit. We'll have the mentors or coordinators report what the credit total was when the students were brought into the program, and then what the new total is at the end of each term. They will be tracking the primary interventions they're using. On a weekly and monthly basis, they will be using multiple different interventions. And then at the end of each term, we're going to ask mentors and coordinators and directors to look at those weekly and monthly tracking sheets and decide what was the primary intervention that they used with each student. And we have narrowed that down to 4 different choices. And that's just in an effort to collect better data that we can share back with our office as far as prevention efforts go. And then we're also going to have them track on the summary the reason for exit. And that could be as simple as the student was placed in another location, or they were adopted or returned home. And we've narrowed that down. I didn't include it here, but we've narrowed that down to 5 options. Again, that's just an attempt to collect better data so we can look at what's going on statewide. And then the exit was also an attempt to make sure kids have been exited out of one district so they can be accepted into another if that's the case. So the mentors use data to share the check data with the students each week, and that is their academic progress, any behavior issues going on, and let me admit somebody, and help the students set goals with that check data. It also lets the mentors recognize patterns. Like if a student is missing math every single day, the mentor should probably talk with the student about what it is about math they don't like, and maybe help them resolve those issues. It also allows mentors to celebrate the successes with students. And for some kids, that may look like, you know, earning a credit or completing an assignment. We want them to celebrate even those little successes with the students. It also allows the mentors to determine the level and type of intervention that they should be using with their students. The Check and Connect implementation with Fidelity manual that they're all given and trained on in the 2-day training has many different interventions that the mentors can be using. And then also anything that your districts have adopted as intervention or prevention programs, they could be looking at those types as well. So why mentor data is important? It's not only important for those weekly meetings to make sure mentors are helping students as best they can, but hopefully it's helpful to you as coordinators and directors to look at patterns with students and maybe help make some decisions at the local level on what preventions or interventions can be done. And of course that trickles up to the state level, as well as helping us, or we hope, helping us justify the expense of the Check and Connect program from the YIC line item. Okay, now we get to talk about professional development, which I think we've all figured out at this point is my preference. So like I was saying earlier, we created a webinar series when COVID hit, and it was very well responded to. The mentors were participating in large groups, and even during the summer, we were getting a small group and some individuals who were volunteering to participate on their own time. And it was really fun as they were coming back from summer. I was getting emails from them asking where the recordings were and eager to participate even if it was after the fact. So what's up here now is a link, and this will of course go out with everything as well, a link to the previous sessions that are recorded and then the upcoming schedule. The content for these webinars was decided basically by the mentors. I asked them after the first session what training they needed and got lots of good responses. And we have worked with primarily the Safe and Healthy Schools team at this point, but other agencies, and you'll see on there in January, Naté is going to talk about special ed specific to CNC. But all good stuff, and mentors email to inform me they participated, and most of them usually share back some really good comments about how much they've learned and how they are eager to participate in the next session. So on that, or excuse me, with that, we will be hosting, well, not we, Granite. Thank you, Granite. Thank you, Jason and Ann. We will be hosting a 2-day in-person training, October 13th and 14th. We will be closing registration for that next week on the 9th, just to make sure we have materials prepared. Ann Jones from Granite and Jeff Sagers from Ogden are 2 of the certified Check and Connect trainers in Utah and mentor coordinators, and they will be conducting the training since USBE staff is still in our dungeons. Just email me the information if you've got some folks who are needing to participate. We will have to limit that in-person training to 15 individuals just to ensure social distancing is possible. And I only have 5 registered now. So if you've got some folks, even if you just say, hold 2 places for me, just shoot me an email and let me know. So the bigger question I have for everybody today is additional professional development offerings. Our team is wondering specifically if there's any issues with sharing out professional development information with the mentors, and especially if those professional development options include fees. One in particular, Kaylee Crandall, who's part of the Safe and Healthy Schools team, offers 2 different post-secondary education courses through SUU that are actually for the school counselors, but we've had a conversation and feel like they would be beneficial to the mentors as well. These courses teach not only how to connect kids to post-secondary options, but some of the barriers that students face and who individuals can connect with in the schools to help them be more successful in preparing for post-secondary education, like making sure they're taking the right high school classes that will lead to the career path they're looking for. So I'd like to open it up if anybody wants to add in the chat, which I'm trying to figure out where it went on my screen right now, or unmute themselves. Yeah, I'm not seeing the chat, so I'm hoping you'll unmute yourselves if you have any comments about sharing out professional development information with the mentors. Otherwise, we're gonna continue, well, we'll continue with the webinars either way, but I do want to share out that information about those SUU courses and then any other good information I come across as we move forward.
Amanda, I can see the chat just fine, so I will let you know if anything comes up here.
Thank you, Julia. I'm not going to complain about crickets in this one. Oh, but I see Carol has unmuted. What's up, Carol?
There's Carol again. Oh, people are like, get her off the call.
No, we appreciate, well, at least I appreciate you, so there you go.
Amanda, are you available at all? Like if I have a YIC student mentor staff meeting through Zoom, just to kind of maybe go over some of the new data reporting and some of those things?
Yes, I would love to participate.
Okay, I'll email you. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. And actually what I was going to do, we had a webinar on the 15th of this month with the mentors, and I quickly reviewed the new spreadsheets. But as we dug into creating directions to go with those spreadsheets, we discovered we could add some information and improve them. So I'm going to email each YIC team individually with the new spreadsheets and the directions, just to make sure everybody gets a copy and that they're aware of this change in the data collection. And like with Carol, I would love to participate. I can host a Zoom if I need to. Since I'm hosting today, I think y'all know that, but I can do that for you guys, or phone calls, emails. I want to be as available to you and the mentors as possible. So it doesn't look like we have any questions, which again, I'm not going to complain about because this feels like good stuff that we can share out this information with your mentors. And I do just want to take a minute and tell you all you have amazing mentors. I love their questions when we're having the webinars. I especially love that now that I'm back, the folks who have had a chance to get to know me are contacting regularly and asking questions. This is a more increased level of communication I've noted just since the beginning of this school year. So with that, that's the end of it for me. So I guess we will pass it back to Miss Julia at this point.
All right, so I guess I have a quick question. This is time that we've allotted for a break, but since we're ahead of schedule, we've been back for about an hour. If you're okay, we can just move forward with the last portion of our agenda and then wrap up earlier. Are we okay with that? If there's anybody that's not okay with that and you are brave, or yeah, thumbs up are good. Okay.
Brian has a digital thumb. I didn't even know that was an option. There
That
we go.
was helpful.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, we could do thumbs up. Okay. Then I think we'll just go ahead and move forward. Naté, if you're okay with that, unless you need time, but I think you're okay just facilitating this last conversation, right? So we will pass it on.
And we put Naté here at the very end so she could correct all of our missteps. So pay attention as she lines everything up. Naté, welcome.
Thank you. So I'm just facilitating. I'm not presenting anything, but we know that typically in your meetings, this is one of the nice things is that we're all together and it's a good time to ask questions or to discuss anything. And we're a small enough group. We kind of talked about maybe doing a survey, but we've been using the chat box pretty well throughout the day. So we didn't create one because we just figured that, so on our agenda, we've got current events and challenges. So if there is something you want to discuss as a group, we figured you could type it into the chat box. And then I'm just facilitating, which means I'll jump in and help guide if we need to, but this is really your time. So again, it can be as short or as long as the group would like. So to start off, what we were hoping is everybody could type into the chat if there is something that you want to discuss. We guessed that there may be some similar topics among you all. So I'll give you just a minute to type in just anything that you're currently struggling with or wondering about and would like to take this chance to hear from your colleagues and discuss with your colleagues. Okay, let's take one more minute. We've got some good ones in the chat box already. And of course we can take topics as they come up too. We just figured it would be good to ask in the beginning so we can prioritize or see what we have to deal with. So I'll give you like one more minute. Okay. Well, it looks like something that multiple folks are asking about is the YEC form. And I don't know if Nick has some clarification on that, or Julia. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that one.
I will unmute, but I'm going to let Nick take care of that.
You're so sweet. I'm going to unmute and ask Blake to talk about it a little bit. Blake, we're talking about the Youth in Care Student Information Form, how it's utilized, its purpose, who we're expecting to turn one in, and so forth. Blake, would you be willing to talk for a moment about how it works there in Davis School District? Actually, I'm not even seeing Blake's name.
Blake is there under B. Daniels with the elk.
Oh yeah, the elk, that's right. Blake, are you able to talk? I know we were having trouble earlier. All right, Travis, you're up.
All right, so long story short, now that I get to do these things on the ground level, all of the youth in custody forms that we bring in, we manage on a Google platform digitally, so we can share them out with caseworkers and others when appropriate for our what we now call our enrollment meetings or our enrollment review meetings. But to answer the question, any student that is meeting the definition, the statutory definition of youth in custody, we get a form on. And then anything above and beyond that they'll provide for us, anything they'll give us, anything from psychologicals to incident histories from other districts, we will gladly take. And then at that point, if we don't, for us, we only meet with students that we don't know where they're going to be. I mean, we have residential treatment facilities that have cohorts within our middle school and our high school. And so any student that comes in there, we don't have a separate meeting for them. We just know they're going to join us at one of those cohorts, and we gather the requisite information, and onward and forward we go. I think the trickier conversation at the moment has to do with home detention students and youth services students, both of which don't meet the traditional definition of custody, but are receiving services formally from DHS/DJJS. And you may be seeing more and more of those students in your schools or being contacted by DJJS youth services coordinators and going, who is this? Or a home detention coordinator, trying to have you facilitate those. I do think as those students are in our district, we also seek out YEC forms on those students as well.
So Stacy has a question related to that. She says, what about DSPD placed students?
Yeah, so DSPD is a tricky one. So some of those DSPD students may meet the definition of receiving services from formally. It really depends on that service provision. As most of us know, those DSPD homes are for students in most cases who are going to be receiving long-term care from DSPD. Not short-term care. And so I would absolutely have a form on those students as well. Great question. And just for what it's worth, we're actually going through the coordinating form for every Proctor home in our district. So we have them fill out a coordinating form and subsequently all of the YEC paperwork for all their students as well. It gives us a base on exactly who's in the boundaries, who's taking students. As most of you know, they can take up to 3 students on average in lots of those homes. And so it's just good to know who they are and where they're located. And for the most part, it's been worked really well. I mean, we don't meet every week because we don't have students coming in that frequently. Jason probably doesn't have that luxury. He's going to probably be meeting at least once a week, staffing kids. But we've been fortunate so far for everyone to kind of participate, and it alleviates some headaches.
Any questions, further questions related to that, or comments from anyone?
I do want to add just a little comment here. the youth education coordinating form has evolved quite a bit in the last 2 years. The problem is that it's a licensing form that is required from the Office of Licensing for a human services program to get licensed. In the past, it's really been utilized as a form to connect the education services and the human services program to really create a good understanding between the two. The current version of the form doesn't accomplish that. It's been much simplified. It's basically contact information is the primary purpose of that form now, which leads us along this road of MOUs, right? It really served kind of as an MOU previously, saying, hey, these are the services the school district will provide. This is what the human services program will do to facilitate those services, right? It no longer really fills that role. So as you're looking at old education coordinating forms and new education coordinating forms, you may have to start filling in the blanks a little more through an MOU with the human services programs that you serve. And that's both youth in custody programs and non-youth in custody programs as well.
So Jason makes a point, it would be nice if we could have a uniform MOU for YIC students across the state. I guess a follow-up question I have for Jason or for others would be, are there nuances with programs or situations, but we could kind of have that foundational piece and then districts or LEAs could build in the nuanced?
There definitely are nuances. Just the same as that coordinating forum. That coordinating forum is very time consuming and it doesn't really impact on our end at all. And being on a large district, it's extremely time consuming, involving not only multiple members in my office, but our policy director at the district level, special ed. And so we've kind of had discussions. We feel like we're doing something to support DHS when it really has no value for us. What we really need is something in an MOU with the facilities that speaks to what are some basic levels of understanding. Colleen sent over an example of her form to me, and I like a lot of the things in it, but perhaps there can be some uniform bullets in there and then an area to customize to its nuances, just so that all of our agency partners get familiar with it, because that is one benefit of the coordinating forum, is that it does have a universal feature, but its frustration is when it goes beyond that. I think you could incorporate both parts to have that accomplished. Right.
Yeah, I think when we say a uniform MOU, that's not going to happen. We live in the wrong state for that. However, creating a template, I think is definitely a possibility. Looking at the ideas that you probably should consider including in your MOU, we can work on developing a template of sorts, a uniform template that will serve as a guide to make an MOU much easier to create.
Even if we could have one, I mean, you get into a lot of the different agencies, but a lot of us have specific JJS facilities and stuff like that. And I think it's reasonable to expect their procedures are so systematized that we could have an MOU specific to them. And then when you're getting into the proctor agencies, yeah, it wouldn't make sense. But that could be pretty, when I was looking over Colleen's in Canyons, it speaks to staffing levels and rooms, which is something that Travis and a bunch of us talked about when we met at Mill Creek. I think those are just good practices. It's good stakeholder communications that it's not a gotcha form. It's a form that helps us keep on track of where we're trying to head. You've had if Murray's still with us, we've talked about, how we plan is sometimes differently than how our agencies plan, and it allows for a common planning instrument for us to have. Sometimes JJS has said they don't really want to sit down with us and talk about strategic planning, but that is kind of what we do in a number of our areas. So it kind of creates a common ground as I see it.
That's helpful. I mean, what I probably we'll talk about it internally, but I think it would probably be good to at least get a group of you together to help us. And like you said, use some examples from some folks who are already using them, and then maybe parse out, like you're saying, some standards for certain ones, and then areas where it will be more flexible or individualized per program.
Let me ask a question to Travis, just because I know we spent some additional time afterwards talking. Is this something that is just more of a granite thing, or is this something that would be beneficial to others? Because I don't want to create more
There's
nuances
a lot of
and problems
comments.
for.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jason.
Okay.
People are commenting saying that it would be helpful. So I don't think it's just you.
Okay.
Like 3 or 4 people have
Okay.
said they feel like that would be nice.
And Robert's going to share, I think Robert might share with everyone the one we mocked up with the state hospital that was based on that legal template that we drew up ages ago. I don't even remember which attorneys drew it up, but it offers some opportunities to do a variety of different things. So I'm game. I think back in the day, there was so much autonomy with LEAs that were kind of like, hey, thanks, no thanks. We don't want to do this work. But nowadays, I think everyone's kind of stepping up and taking their position. So I think it's not a matter of whether we're going to serve. It's a template that defines how we will serve. And there are nuances there that can be individualized by district, but I think it's very doable.
Great conversation.
Naté,
Yeah.
Murray here. Just a question for the number one. I agree that we should have a common MOU, but I want to ask a question of those who have MOUs with JJS or anybody else. How effective have they been, or have they kind of due to lack of attention or due to people not wanting to abide by the MOU? How effective have they become in time, or do you have enough experience to even answer the question? Okay, who has an MOU?
This is Carol. Just in the past, both when I was at the USBE and then at the local level, we had MOUs that we did with our local mental health authorities around school-based mental health services. And I think they were very helpful in the sense you could kind of put in like, this is what we offer and what you have to offer. And then when those conditions weren't met, it was an easier conversation to go back and say, hey, remember, this is what we agreed upon in our MOU, and kind of bridge those maybe conflicts or situations that occurred.
I agree, Carol. That's not always been the experience that we've had. I won't go into any details, but it's critical that the MOU be reviewed regularly, that if it goes into writing, it just doesn't get set on a shelf and everybody goes back to business as usual. If it's not reviewed regularly, you will have drift, and drift will take you into the ditch.
I agree, but I just think it'll be helpful from us in the field as YIC directors if we could get a template from you at the USBE, especially where you're requiring it as part of our review.
I agree, Carol. I'm not arguing against MOUs. In fact, I'm arguing for them, but I'm just saying systemically, if you just put it in writing and you're not regularly reviewing it, it will drift.
Yeah, just for context, historical context, the one that I think Robert may find and share was based off of work that was done in adult corrections. So adult corrections has a statewide MOU that I think addresses both the educational component of the state board and then the AOC, the Adult Office of Corrections, or whatever their title is these days. So that's another interesting approach. I think, at the end of the day, MOUs help kind of define and delineate the nuance at the local level, and it also allows for those that want to look at it to kind of get a broader picture of the entire statewide effort. So to the extent that they're valuable and not majorly time consuming, I'm a proponent. But anything else that we can put, systematically into the, like the coordinating forum process, the initial concept makes a lot of sense, right? The actual implementation of it or the usage of it may not have as much merit as was intended.
Again, if I may, Naté.
Sure, yeah.
I have no idea what the MOUs are that you're using right now, but I would strongly encourage them to include such things as goals, roles, responsibilities, accountability to each other. I would include a section on strategic planning and how strategic planning is going to be done. And when JJS decides to shut down a facility or open up facilities or makes a turn without notifying you, that's part of the things you need to have in the MOU that includes the provision for watching out for each other's goals. And in the world of collaboration, which I think is an 8-letter swear word because it's so often abused, I think it's critical that the partners know each other's goals and that they work feverishly to help each other to achieve their goals. Otherwise, it can, the MOU will drift.
Thanks, Marie. So I think we've got some good notes, some good thoughts from some of you. It sounds like some examples. So I think we'll definitely do some work on that moving forward. I'm keeping an eye on the chat box. I'm going to jump back up to then one of our initial questions and call on Carol. Carol said she'd like to discuss timeframes to achieve credits with students and discharge dates. So if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
I'd probably just like to hear from the other YIC directors if they run into this problem. We get the students enrolled in our high school. They attend regular classes at Murray High School. The adult transition program, the Alpha program, as you know, is 60 to 90 days. So depending on when the students come in and when they leave, it's a problem to award credit. So it's trying to get word to caseworkers and judges, please don't pull the students unless it's like a week from the end of the term, because that gets super hard to award credits. It's really defeating to the boys when they come in, we get them working, they do really good work, getting credits done, and then they're pulled from the program and we can't award things. I don't know if other folks are having that problem getting, I'd say probably like judges, caseworkers, folks to understand when they're transitioning kids, try to do it when there's like a natural kind of break. Maybe others aren't having that problem because they do their own kind of online credit recovery where our students are actually enrolled right into the high school courses at Murray High.
Carol, we actually do classes with the YIC kids. So our kids aren't doing online school. We have the teachers rotating and everything. So we have the same kind of issue, but we haven't had the same issue the last couple of years because we've reached out to the judges and we have rehabilitation staff who take them to their court dates, right? They actually speak up in court and say, hey, this is when the term ends. Can we keep them until this time or have an exit date around this time? And it's actually been working. So communicating with the judges directly has been really working for us down at Pleasant Creek.
Great, thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, I think one of our disconnects too, and I will follow up, is we aren't told until like the day before maybe that the kids even, or the day that they even are appearing in front of a judge. But thanks for that, Stephen. I will get with our caseworkers and see if we can't get some better communication with the courts.
Yeah, we have to reach out. We have to actually go out and ask about the kids, but the kids are really vocal with us. They know about a week ahead and they'll tell us, hey, I got court, because they want us to reach out and say, hey, good luck, or what do you need from us? And so the kids have been really good telling us, hey, I have court soon. And that's when we get things prepared. So maybe the kids, if they know beforehand, you can tell them, hey, let us know when you have court so we can be on your side, and they'll be really communicated with you.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else?
I would just say too, if you're running into challenges communicating with judges or with caseworkers, supervisors, liaisons, whomever with DCFS, JJS, just reach out to. I'm happy to help navigate some of those relations and make connections to people if necessary.
Thanks, Julia. We'll go back to Stephen, because Stephen said that he would love to discuss transfer procedures for YIC students. So yeah, chat a little bit about that.
So here's what we're running into, and I know most alternative schools are going through the continual school improvement right now, and everybody's really worried about graduation rates, but there's kind of a game that's being played that's dirty, and so it's not cool. We're having a lot of issues with YIC kids as young as sophomores. When they leave our program, like what Carol was talking about, they get exited out and they go home. The school districts are not enrolling them. They're enrolling them straight into adult education. And like I said, we have sophomores who are doing that. And and fortunately, we had to get Nick involved in a few. We've had districts refuse to allow students to enroll. And so then these students are just lost off the grid and counted as dropouts. So what is the actual procedure? What are the requirements? Because we have been getting kids back on track to graduate in an alternative setting. For a lot of them, we're getting a lot of credit recovery done. And then they say, yeah, I registered in school. And then we get our Power School reports saying, here's the kids that are going to count as your dropouts. And we have a kid from 3 years ago who left that we have nothing to do with anymore. And they were enrolled into adult ed as soon as they left our school. And so then they count as a dropout for us, even when, you know, they've been taking classes. So what is the actual procedure so that when these kids leave, we can get them back into school and not into just an adult ed program, so that districts don't have to worry about their graduation rates and they're kind of screwing us over, you know, in a way to say, there's nothing we can do about it. Once they leave, they're out of our hands. You know what I mean? So what is the actual procedure for that?
Hey, Nick, can I chime in on that? Because I'm at a public school and I can tell you some of the problems with that we're
yeah, Jerry, please.
So part of the problem is when they come from an alternative setting, and they come to a regular high school, for example, my district has 2 regular high schools. Okay, I'm at the alternative high school, but the regular high schools, the graduation credits are not necessarily the basic minimum 24 credits. So a student may come from a program where they're on track to graduate at 24 credits, but not on track to graduate, say, at Box Elder High in our district at 30 credits. And so a lot of times they're not on track to graduate. The high schools will say, well, your only option as far as a diploma goes is adult ed, meaning with that 24 credit diploma.
So do you guys at your alternative school, do you require 30 credits also?
No, at our alternative school, we do 24 credits. So if it's but not every district has an alternative high school. So, and up until last year, our alternative high school was not, we just barely got the board to approve us as a 24 credit high school. So up until last year, we were a 30 credit high school because we're on trimesters, and that works a little different than semesters. And so it may be something you're seeing with the high schools, depending on the district and the state. And if they don't have an alternative high school that's doing 24 credits, it may be a credit issue to match up with their district, which should be fixed. Something's got to happen with that. Yeah. I agree, that's not the way it should be.
See, in my opinion, I think the district should then enroll that student into their school and then enroll them into adult ed, because they are now responsible for that student. Me in the middle of Mount Pleasant, nowhere, San Pete County, Utah, if a kid leaves my school as a sophomore and goes to a school district, that's not my responsibility anymore. You see what I'm saying? Right. And so according to our stats, we have over a 70% graduation rate with kids who actually stay at our school. But with all the YIC kids leaving, we're down under 40%, you know what I mean? And that's why I'm saying we need to have something that districts need to be responsible for the kids that are actually coming into their school. And that's where the frustrating part is coming in with me is 90% of my kids, more than that this year because of the whole social distancing and at home and schooling, more than 90% of the kids at my school are YIC in a rehabilitation home. We have kids that literally come in for 60 days for the drug rehab program, and then they leave after 60 days, and I'm responsible for their entire graduation, which to me is not fair.
And with the new state, kind of cracking down with the graduation numbers, that's a problem.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I want to see if we can get something going to where it's universal with everyone, you know what I mean? And in my opinion, I think if there's a student that's YIC that drops off the face of the planet, we should be able to mark them as exempt from graduation like a kid who leaves the state. But right now, that's just not an option.
Yeah, Steve, I definitely agree with where you're coming from. To give the rest of you kind of an understanding, when Steve first started there in North St. Pete, kind of right away we bombarded. Bombarded. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. Bombarded him with this issue, right? And we did a very careful case study in North St. Pete. We took all of the students that were showing as dropouts, every single one of them, and did a situational study for that student to find out exactly what happened. And the reality was, I mean, the whole gamut of possibilities. We had students that had passed away. We had students that were in adult incarceration, students that were MIA still, that had never resurfaced after they'd run from the program. The students that were enrolled in adult ed programs.
We even had kids who were
first enrolled in an LEA.
Yeah, we even had kids who did get properly enrolled with other districts, but then there's an error in the state system that still recognizes them with us and with them. And so they were double, even with the same SATs.
Yeah, I think in all that study, we had one duplicate SSID that we were able just to merge those records and take care of that, right? Out of like
last year we had 4. And good. So we got those ones figured out. It was it was through Provo School Independent High School. We actually got on the phone with them because they had 4 kids that they enrolled properly. They did everything to the book, but for some reason it just did not go through in the state.
Yeah. So talking about the path forward here, there's a few different issues that we're looking at. The first is really improving our ability to work and track students through transition. That's a responsibility of YIC that has probably not been followed through with in some areas, and in other areas probably followed through with a lot better than I even understand. But tracking these students after they leave a program to make sure that they're connected with their next program. So we need to be able to continue that work, similar to what Steve and I did with his students, to find out where every single student ended up and being able to categorize those. So we can say, yes, we ended up with 18 extra dropouts, and these are the reasons why. And for the most part, Steve's saying that this is a rigged system is true. The problem is finding a solution, right? And step one is collecting that data, really understanding what the problem is so that we can present it to those who are able to make the necessary changes to find a lasting solution. As far as this problem of enrolling students directly into adult ed, this is an issue that we probably need to start pursuing again. It is, from my understanding, and I don't have exact quotes or anything, but it is board rule that a student prior to being enrolled into an adult ed program has to be enrolled as a student at the LEA, right? They can't enroll a student directly into an adult ed program that's not a student in their LEA. I don't believe that that's adhered to as often as it should be, and for the exact reasons that we're seeing, that it does basically saddle you with that dropout, right? And as the emphasis on these dropouts become greater and greater, and the importance of 1 percentage point for a school district becomes that much more influential on the work that they do in the near future, we're seeing issues like this come up more and more. I'll continue to work with our adult ed group here at the board and try to develop some plans to overcome that particular issue. As far as the credit issue, going from a school with lower credit requirements than others, that's something we can start looking at. I don't think we have really in the past. I know that in some other states there is a YIC specific requirement, right? That students who are in custody are basically 24-hour credit hour graduate students, right? Regardless of where they go. I don't know if that's a possibility here in Utah. It's a very local control state that we have here, and that might not be something that we're able to accomplish, but it might be something that we can start looking into the repercussions of changing to a requirement like that and see if it's both beneficial and possible to head that direction.
Hey, Nick.
But sorry, just one more thing. For you guys, I would say number one is making sure we have good records of what's happening with these students that are moving on for your district. And that's probably a work that we can do together in the very near future. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
I was just wondering, I don't know that I want, are we suggesting that 24-hour or 20 credit be what we want? Because I like the fact that some of our kids have 27 with JJS's, or I should say JJS with juvenile reform, keeping kids longer in facilities, or shorter in facilities. God, I can't even get my talk straight. I think it's good for some of these kids in some situations to get out and increase their exposure, returning to schools or to classrooms and do that. So I don't know that I want a blanket 24 credit. I think it's an option depending on the scenarios. And we have because we run into this quite a bit with, the number of programs and sites we have ran it. I like having a graduation review team take a look at the kids' particular circumstances and going from there.
Yeah, and as we move forward with our portrait of a graduate model here in the state and competency-based grading, all of these conversations will continue to change. And Jason, I'm not suggesting at all that we jump into pushing anything one way or the other, but seeking to really understand the problem and potential solutions and working from there.
Hey, Nick, Murray. We already have somewhat of a precedence for the action of 24 credits or whatever number of credits. And I'm not advocating for it, but saying we already have a bit of a precedence for that. And that's the high school equivalency diplomas and so forth. It doesn't say you have to have X number of credits. You show level of competency at certain levels in certain subjects. And so we could kind of extrapolate that as a possibility for the youth in custody youth, possibly. Just there's that possible precedence out there. Done.
I just want to jump in. It's not only the YIC kids and maybe others that are in alternative education. It's a big problem for alternative students, period. So that 4-year cohort, if they were ever enrolled or even if they came in for a day, then they're on your list if they don't get attached to another school. If they go, you have to do a lot. We've been doing that work. We did it at the end of the school year, and then the hard deadline was today. So we identified kids in June who we could hopefully get over that hump or invite them back to school. But if they went, it was my understanding, and so I'm asking USBE folks if that's true on this 4-year cohort list that we're talking about. If they go into an adult ed program and that adult ed program graduates them and you have a proof of diploma, then that is also an exemption off the list. Isn't that correct, or am I mistaken? So look,
my power school representative told us that if someone does graduate with an adult ed degree with their graduating class, then they it doesn't count as exemption. It actually does count as graduation. You can mark it as graduation or success in some way.
Right.
However, the problem is if a student goes into adult ed, we're not being told that. We're not being communicated. It's just showing up as a dropout. And so if we could even come up with a way of, hey, this happened to you guys and we did enroll them in adult ed, but they did graduate. Here's all the information. It's a big form to fill out. It's actually a lot of work to get proof of that and everything. Cause we did Provo, independent school in Provo did have one kid. They enrolled him into their school, and then they enrolled him in adult ed, but for some reason he was still showing up as an R student this last year. But they gave us proof of everything, and it took her about 3 weeks coordinating with the state, with USBE, as to what we can do to mark him as a graduate, because Provo just said, hey, if they're not taking him off your stuff, then go ahead and mark him as a graduate. And so it does take a while. It's just not an easy process whatsoever.
We put hours and hours trying to find these kids. And so since this came out, I think it's when the CSI stuff came out. Was it 2 years ago or last?
Yep. And see, we have a tracker at our school, and his main job is he does a lot of skill set stuff. So he teaches them once a week or twice a week and does, you know, all the skill certifications with them. But then he also talks to them and communicates with them after school. And some of the things that he's being told is, my school district forced me into adult ed, which Gerald gave a good reason for that, is maybe they don't have an alternative school program, and that's their only choice on that. And so he tries to find these kids and what's going on with them, but it's still not a perfect system. Like Nick said, we're still trying to figure out how to make it work more effectively.
Right. And well, Nick, I didn't realize that that districts were supposed to enroll them in their high school first before they put them in adult ed, because I haven't found that to be the case when we've been trying to track down the kids. So if that's what is supposed to be happening.
Good to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
I'd have to say that's good to know, because we just had a student who transferred districts last week, and he went right to an adult ed program. So we're going to take the dropout for him. So
yeah.
Let me get an official response from our adult ed friends here at the state board, and I will get that sent out to everyone so that we all can see exactly what board rule says and what should be happening. And you know, that's going to be step one, just having a good solid understanding of exactly what should be happening on our end, and then we can start pushing that out.
That's great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Travis, were you going to say something? I saw that you had turned on your video and then you turned it off.
Travis had to hop off for a moment for an issue.
That's fine. Okay. So the next question came from Nick, and Nick asked the question, are students in day treatment programs getting sufficient education opportunities?
I'll kind of add to that just a little bit. I just have some general concerns, and this really is an open and honest question. I wonder, are the kids in day treatment, whether JJS day treatment programs or public or private day treatment programs, are they getting sufficient education, or has treatment taken priority over education? And if that's the case, is that a bad thing in these situations? And any comments I would welcome. I'm just trying to better understand what's going on, because we're seeing, I think, more and more day treatment programs across the state right now.
Well, mine's a very small example, and I don't even know if I'll answer your question, because Odyssey has the residential, and then they also have the ability for day treatment kids to come in, you know, and also with the COVID thing, that's been a challenge too, because you've got kids out in day treatment living in the community coming into a residential facility for day treatment, you know, and they have they have really good protocols in place, like they symptom check and check their thermometer, you know, and everybody wears masks and stuff, but it's problematic, you know. And then the kids that are living in their homes in their Odyssey day treat, you know, that come in, for school, you know, some of the families out there they're living with, or they might be home, you know, then they don't want the kids coming in there and stuff. So it's problematic. But hopefully, if we ever get out of this, that would be working in place, and they'd at least get the education. And then as things also open up and stuff, because they're doing regular school. So they're doing a combination of online, and then I have the teachers coming in a couple days. So we're doing kind of a hybrid, even though my whole district's supposed to be online. We've been able to make some exceptions for Odyssey because of their situation and stuff. So that's starting to work, but I see that growing. You know, that not all day treatments are connected to a residential that already has a school going. So, but that's my example.
Thanks, Wendy. Anybody else? Okay, well, we're being quiet, but I think Nick probably has a list of who has day treatment, so we'll just stalk you later.
And he'll be in touch.
And get you to tell us more if we want more information. Steve, you had something?
I was just going to say, I think, to be honest, I think the YIC homes are doing a lot. Like, everyone's improving. We've seen a lot of improvements from kids coming in. Compared to what we had before. We used to get a lot of kids who literally had no credits coming in school. They just weren't going to school. And that's nobody's fault but their own, to be honest. I mean, the school district can't sit there and knock on the door and grab them out of bed and drag them to school, right? And it's kind of one of those things on them. But we're getting a lot of kids who've been coming from other programs. They're getting transferred from program to program right now with behavioral issues. And we have a lot more kids coming in with a lot more credits now. And so I think a lot of kids, and I know that doesn't mean quality education, but these kids are coming in and doing well in our classroom setting. Because at Pleasant Creek, we do online school for kids who have already taken classes that we offered, right? But for the most part, we have the teachers teaching them full day, and they're doing really well in the classroom. So I commend everybody in YIC right now, because I think everyone's making those improvements to get kids prepared to get into classroom settings and to also move on to secondary school, post-secondary schools. And so I think it's really improving a lot over the last few years.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Okay, I'm scanning the chat box. And aside from kind of responses that folks had to earlier conversations, I'm not, okay, actually I see one in here for Carol. Carol, I think you said education services not being a priority for JJS and RTCs.
Well, I think that's kind of was covered with the whole outreach to judges and that, just getting, okay. And I think even in the MOU, sometimes we just have our RTC not having kids show up for first period, and that's when we do a lot of the one-on-one and stuff, but I'll just work to coordinate with them a little more, and I think the MOU will help with some of that. So thanks, Naté.
Okay, thanks, Carol. So I can't see, but people can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not seeing any other new topics. It does look like Wendy had some questions for Nick and Julia just at the end of the meeting. After we're finished, she could stay on and chat with you guys. But does anybody else have anything that's come to mind as we've been discussing, or something you hadn't thought of at the beginning that you'd want to talk about? Now would be the time. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Nick and Julia.
That's all we have, folks. So that would conclude the agenda for the day. I do want to just say a few things. We will do what we can to wrap up a post-meeting documentation where you'll get the slides. we'll include some things that you sent on as well that could be helpful. And that you should be getting that in the next few days, I would imagine. And if you've got questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out. I've enjoyed today a lot. I've enjoyed seeing some of your faces and hearing from you. It's very helpful for me in my position. So thank you for participating. Nick, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, we can't close without an inspirational message of some sort, right? So I was on the Facebook a couple days ago. That's a big mistake in my life right now, is getting on the Facebook more often, and I'm trying to curtail that. But a friend of mine, a teacher friend of mine, posted a link to her blog, and I went and read some of her thoughts on returning to school. And she wrote, I'm going to read from her blog here. It says, another thing significantly affected by necessary COVID-related restrictions, all those good teaching practices, you know, the ones that really help a student internalize the lessons and information, out the window, kaput, unacceptable. For example, one of the most effective teaching strategies is to have students discuss, collaborate, and work in small groups. Because of the risk of exposure, that's not an option this year. And it really struck me. I understand that she's frustrated, and rightfully so. But we collectively in this meeting have so much experience of how to do good things for students. And none of that experience, none of that knowledge that you have is discounted in any way by the current situation. We still have the responsibility and the potential to provide these students with academic education connections in a way that no one else has before, right? Take this opportunity to know that you can go above and beyond what we were doing in the past, that the potential for growth with these students now is probably greater than ever. You know, when March came and everything was going down, it was very frustrating to me to not be in the classroom at that time, because I saw the potential and the opportunity for change. So the opportunity to embrace the things that were working in the past and really push the direction for the future for connecting with kids and improving their life situation. That's where we're at right now, and I think that's where we're always at, to know that we can always do better and that there's always opportunity to improve the work that we're doing for these students. I appreciate you guys. I'm with Julia. It's so good to see faces and hear voices. It's reinvigorating for us. It makes this corner in my basement seem worthwhile again. So thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you everyone that shared messages with us. And we'll be in touch. We'll keep pushing the work forward.
Thank you.
All right, I guess that's the official adios. Thank you, everyone.